The air inside the underwater research dome tasted like recycled despair and last week's beans. And Dr. Lyra Voss couldn't decide which was worse. Her team had managed to escape the smoldering ruins of Earth for this slushy hellscape, only to find out that surviving an apocalypse was a lot like being stuck in a malfunctioning blender. The walls shuddered occasionally, reminding everyone that Europa was doing its best impression of a meat grinder. "Lyra, you seen the latest readings?" grumbled Riggs, her chief engineer and preferred cynic. A former pilot with all the warmth of a dead fish, he was currently wrestling with a console that had given up on life about the same time humanity had. "If it's anything like the last readings, I'm sure I'd rather pour bleach in my eyes," Lyra replied, flipping a switch on her own terminal. The holographic display sputtered to life, casting a sickly blue glow that made her feel like she was being haunted by a disco ghost. "Electromagnetic signals," Riggs said, scratching his stubbly chin. "Coming from below, real deep. Probably where they keep the alien booze." Lyra rolled her eyes. "You think aliens drink? If they've got to live down there, I'd say they drink a lot." For a second, she entertained the notion. Who wouldn't need a stiff one when you're probably stuck in a frozen ocean, courtesy of Jupiter's most unfriendly moon? "Well, Riggs, if we find the alien bar, first round's on me." "Damn right it is, Doctor," Riggs grunted, giving the console one last affectionate smack. It complied by wheezing out an updated energy readout. "But seriously, these signals ain't natural." She knew he was right. Something about them screamed not from around here, more than the tourist in a Hawaiian shirt at a vampire convention. The problem was, Earthlings had a knack for bumping into trouble, a skill that didn't fade just because the planet decided to implode. "Guess we should check it out," Lyra said, wishing she felt as brave as she sounded. "What's the worst that could happen? We all die horrible deaths," Riggs suggested, ever the optimist. "Good to know you're keeping it positive," Lyra retorted, standing up to address the rest of her motley crew, each face glued to various tasks that kept the dome from becoming a very expensive tomb. There was Sweeney, the biologist whose only love was the microscopic life clinging desperately to the icy exterior, probably the only thing keeping her sane. Next to her was Marlowe, communications expert and master of all things that beep annoyingly. And finally, O'Reilly, the medic who'd signed up for this mission only to realize that panic attacks weren't covered by her insurance. "All right, folks, here's the deal," Lyra announced. "We've got some funky signals coming from below, and I'm not talking about Riggs' taste in music. We're going to take a closer look." "You sure about that, Doc?" Sweeney asked, her voice heavy with the sort of dread usually reserved for horror flick victims. "What if it's like Cthulhu's cousin or something? Then maybe he'll be nice enough to drown us quickly," Marlowe interjected, twirling a pen like a baton. "Better than dying of boredom," Lyra smirked. "Look, we're here to do science, remember? This is what we signed up for." "I signed up for the paycheck," O'Reilly said, glancing up from her med kit with a rueful smirk. "Turns out, existential dread doesn't pay well." "Well, chin up, O'Reilly. Maybe we'll discover something that makes us all rich and famous," Lyra replied, knowing full well that their chances of discovering anything other than a watery grave were slim to none. But hope was a curious beast, and it had a way of sticking around like an unwanted house guest. "Right, and maybe Riggs will learn how to smile," Sweeney snorted, adjusting her glasses. "Hey, don't push it," Riggs grumbled, though a glimmer of amusement flickered in his eyes. Lyra took a deep breath, the recycled air filling her lungs with what passed for courage these days. "Let's get the sub ready. We're going for a swim." The crew shuffled into action, moving with the kind of practiced efficiency that only came from having faced the infinite depths of space and bureaucracy together. As Lyra watched them, she couldn't help but feel a grudging affection for her ragtag band of survivors. Flawed, snarky, and damaged, they were her people. Asterisk, 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 the submersible was a clunky beast, more like a tin can with dreams of grandeur. It rattled ominously as Lyra and Riggs climbed inside, the rest of the team monitoring from the safety of the dome. "If this thing springs a leak, I'm blaming you," Riggs said, pulling the hatch closed with a grunt. "If this thing springs a leak, we'll be too dead to argue about it," Lyra replied, settling into her seat and flipping switches with the kind of determination you needed to use a public restroom. The sub lurched forward, and the ice-capped ocean of Europa swallowed them whole, a dim world of shadows and pressure that would have made a lesser person wet their spacesuit. "You ever feel like a sardine, Riggs?" Lyra asked, trying to keep her voice light. "Only every day since we left Earth," he replied, his focus glued to the controls. Down they went, the meters ticking away as the sub descended into the abyss. The signals grew stronger, a persistent buzz that gnawed at the edges of their minds. "What do you think's down there, Doc?" Riggs asked, his voice laced with curiosity and fear. "Aliens, Atlantis, an old Russian sub with a really pissed-off crew," Lyra listed, half serious. "Or just a lot of nothing." "I'll take the nothing, thanks," Riggs muttered. The depth gauge hit bottom, the sub settling onto the ocean floor with a gentle scrape. Outside, the ice loomed like a frozen ceiling, taunting them with the promise of crushing cold. "Let's see if we can find those signals," Lyra said, her hands dancing over the controls. The sonar display lit up with a series of blips, each one more intriguing than the last. They traced the signals to a crevice, a narrow opening that yawned like the mouth of some ancient beast. "Looks inviting," Riggs deadpanned. "You going to chicken out on me now?" Lyra challenged, though she felt the knot of apprehension tightening in her stomach. "Not a chance," Riggs replied, his fingers tightening on the controls as they steered the sub into the crevice. Darkness swallowed them whole, the sub's lights cutting through the murk like flickering candles. The signals grew louder, a symphony of alien static that set their nerves on edge. And then they saw it. A structure, rising from the ocean floor like some forgotten monument to a civilization long past. Glowing with an eerie luminescence, it looked both impossibly ancient and disturbingly advanced. "Well, I'll be damned," Riggs breathed, eyes wide with disbelief. "You're not the only one," Lyra said, a mixture of awe and trepidation churning in her gut. They drifted closer, the sub's lights revealing intricate patterns etched into the structure's surface. Lyra's heart raced, excitement mingling with fear as she realized the implications. "Looks like we've got company," Riggs said, a note of humor in his voice. "Hope they brought snacks." The structure loomed ever larger, its secrets waiting to be uncovered. And though the future was uncertain, one thing was clear. Humanity's next chapter would be written in the icy depths of Europa. "Let's take this slowly," Lyra cautioned, knowing full well that caution had never been their strong suit. The sub shuddered as it drew near, the signals now a deafening roar that seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. "Let's just hope these aliens are the friendly type," Riggs said, his fingers gripping the controls with white-knuckled intensity. "Yeah," Lyra replied, a wry smile tugging at her lips, "because the last thing we need is another apocalypse." In the stale-breathed confines of the underwater research dome, the crew convened like conspirators in an underfunded sci-fi movie. Dr. Lyra Voss had returned from her icy joyride with Riggs, and now it was time to roll up their sleeves and get down to business, which mostly involved trying to make sense of the cosmic headache that were the signals they'd stumbled upon. Lyra sat at the helm of the operation, her holographic display flickering defiantly. The rest of the team was spread around her, armed with gadgets and grim determination. Jax Taryn, the tech-savvy engineer who had once made a toaster sing the national anthem for a bet, was already elbow-deep in wires and circuits. Celine Rin, their biologist with a penchant for finding life in places it had no business existing, hovered nearby with a look that could shatter DNA chains. "So what exactly are we looking at here?" Lyra asked, half her attention on the signals dancing across the display like demented fireflies. "Well," Jax said, his voice dripping with the kind of enthusiasm reserved for tax audits and root canals, "these signals aren't just random noise. They're structured almost like code." "Great." So, are we talking space Morse code or alien Spotify playlist? Riggs chipped in, his feet propped up on a console, contributing absolutely nothing to the process. Closer to space Morse code, Jax replied, looking up from his tangled mess of wires with the expression of a man who just realized his day was about to get a lot longer. It looks like a communication of sorts. Maybe even an attempt to talk. Great, the aliens want to chat, Lyra muttered. Should we bring a fruit basket? Celine peered over Jax's shoulder, her fingers nervously tapping against the side of her tablet. And how stable is this? Chat. Stable as my last relationship, Jax replied, which didn't inspire much confidence. There's something off. The signals are getting weird. Weird how? Lyra pressed, not liking the sound of that one bit. Jax ran a hand through his hair, making it stick up like an abstract sculpture. Well, they started off pretty coherent, like someone saying hello, but now they are more like someone saying hello while falling down a well. Fantastic, Riggs added, his sarcasm practically dripping onto the floor. Our new neighbors are insane already. Insane or just overwhelmed, Celine suggested, always the optimist. If they are a hive mind, like some kind of collective consciousness, maybe our tech is messing with them. Like a bad Wi-Fi signal, Riggs said. Except instead of buffering, they're losing their minds. Lyra let out a sigh that could have been measured on the Richter scale. Right. So how do we stop them from going full alien meltdown? How do you stop anything from having a meltdown? Jax said, pulling out a set of pliers and biting his lip in concentration. You either fix the problem or turn it off and on again. Let's hope unplugging and replugging the universe isn't our only option, Lyra muttered. Celine, can you figure out how these signals relate to the biology of a hive mind? Anything we can do to ease their intergalactic migraine? Celine nodded, a look of determination washing over her face. If we can stabilize the signals, it might help. Think of it like soothing a headache with the right frequency instead of aspirin. Good, Lyra said. Because if these aliens decide they can't take the noise anymore, I'd rather not be around for their version of an aspirin. As Celine dove into her work, Riggs leaned back in his chair, a smirk tugging at his lips. You know, if we do make contact, what's our opening line? Hey, sorry for the headache, Earth's closed for renovations. How about greetings, we're the idiots who tried to colonize your moon, please don't kill us, Jax suggested, his voice oozing with sardonic cheer. Lyra chuckled despite herself. I'm sure we'll come up with something suitably diplomatic. Right, because we're known for our diplomacy, Riggs shot back, his eyebrow arching so high it nearly left orbit. The room filled with the sound of clicking keyboards and the hum of machinery, each member of the team lost in their own world of scientific puzzles and existential dread. Outside, the icy expanse of Europa loomed, a frozen witness to humanity's desperate bid for survival. Iors passed, marked by the occasional curse or exclamation, as the team worked to decode the signals. It was like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube with missing pieces, but giving up wasn't an option, not when the alternative was potentially existentially catastrophic. Okay, Celine said at last, breaking the silence like a glass dropped on concrete. I think I've got something. The signals, they are rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. Great, maybe they're just trying to share their workout playlist, Riggs commented, earning a glare from Jax. No, I mean it's more than that, Celine continued, ignoring Riggs as best she could. If we can match our signals to their rhythm, it might stabilize things, like tuning an instrument. Lyra nodded, a flicker of hope igniting in her chest. Jax, can we sync our tech to that frequency? Jax was already ahead of her, fingers dancing across the keyboard in a blur. Yeah, it's just a matter of adjusting the output. Should be easy enough, assuming they don't decide to change the station mid-song. Do it, Lyra said, and pray they don't have commitment issues. The team held their collective breath as Jax made the adjustments, the room tense with anticipation. It was a gamble and everyone knew it, like betting your last dollar on a horse that had a history of napping mid-race. Here goes nothing, Jax muttered, hitting the final key with the precision of a surgeon and the nerves of a man defusing a bomb. The holographic display flickered, the signals shifting to match the alien rhythm. For a moment, nothing happened, the universe seemingly holding its breath right along with them. Then slowly the cacophony eased, the chaotic signals smoothing into a harmonious pattern. It was like the calming of a storm, the universe itself exhaling in relief. "Holy hell," Riggs breathed, staring at the display as if it had suddenly sprouted wings and started singing opera. "Did it work?" Lyra asked, her voice barely above a whisper, afraid to jinx whatever fragile peace they'd managed to broker. "For now," Celine said, a cautious optimism in her tone. "But we need to keep monitoring it. If the signals shift again, we might have to readjust. So basically, we're babysitting a potentially hostile alien hive mind," Riggs said, his tone somewhere between incredulous and amused. "What could possibly go wrong?" "Hey, it's just another day on Europa," Jax quipped, leaning back in his chair with a grin that verged on maniacal. Lyra let out a laugh, the sound both genuine and tinged with madness. It was a laugh of relief, of disbelief, of a woman who'd just realized that the universe had given them a temporary reprieve. "All right, folks," she said, standing up and stretching her weary limbs. "Let's not jinx it. Keep an eye on those signals and maybe, just maybe, we won't end up as alien chow." The crew nodded, a sense of camaraderie settling over them like a well-worn blanket. They were a bunch of misfits, survivors of an Earth that no longer existed, trying to make their way in a universe that seemed hell-bent on grinding them into stardust. But for now, they'd managed to keep the peace, and that was something. "Anyone up for a drink?" Riggs asked, a rare twinkle in his eye. "I hear the alien bar might be open for business." Lyra smirked, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. "First round's on me, remember." As the team settled back into their monitors, adjusting their focus to the alien signals, the familiar cacophony of their voices mingled with the hum of machinery. They were far from home, trapped on a moon that wanted nothing more than to swallow them whole. But at least they had each other, and that was worth something. In the back of her mind, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The signals, though stable for now, were only the beginning of a much larger mystery, one that could redefine everything they thought they knew about the universe. But that was a problem for tomorrow. For now, they had a semblance of peace, and in the grimdark reality of their world, that was a victory worth celebrating. And maybe, just maybe, the universe would grant them a little respite before whatever came next. The icy air inside the dome tasted like someone had filtered it through a sock, twice. Dr. Lyra Voss barely noticed the stale sting as she stared at the holographic display, watching for any signs of alien tantrums. She felt like a babysitter monitoring a toddler with a penchant for throwing cosmic-sized hissy fits. "Anyone else feel like we're playing interstellar Jenga?" Jax muttered, his fingers still dancing across the keyboard in an attempt to keep everything from toppling over. "One wrong move and kaboom. At least in Jenga the pieces don't explode," Riggs countered, propping his feet on the console again. "Here, the stakes are a tad higher." "Speak for yourself," Celine chimed in, her voice dripping with mock innocence. "I lost a Jenga tournament once. Never got invited to game night again." Jax snorted. "Probably for the best. If this goes south, game night will be the least of our worries." As if on cue, the dome shuddered, a low rumble vibrating through the floor like a growl from Europa itself. The lights flickered, casting their faces in eerie shadows for a brief, unsettling moment before stabilizing. "Someone's not happy," Riggs noted, glancing at the trembling ceiling like it might collapse any second. "Guess the hive mind's having a bad day." "Sounds like they're on the verge of a nervous breakdown," Celine added, more curious than concerned. "I wonder if it's something we said." "Or something we didn't say," Lyra muttered, eyes glued to the display. The signals had started to stutter, a bad sign if there ever was one. "Jax, can you figure out what's causing the surges?" "Working on it," Jax said, tapping keys with the urgency of a man trying to defuse a bomb with a spork. "Our systems are straining to keep up with their shifting frequencies. It's like trying to keep Wi-Fi stable during a solar flare." The dome shuddered again, this time with more intensity. Lyra felt a tingling in her molars, a sure sign that the electromagnetic field was going haywire. Selene, any chance these signals are affecting the biology of the hive mind, maybe pushing them to the edge? Lyra asked, hoping for a quick fix. Selene's brow furrowed as she mulled over the question. It's possible. If they are as interconnected as I think, a disruption in communication could feel like a migraine across their whole network. Great, so they are essentially suffering from a group migraine, Riggs said, his voice the epitome of deadpan. Explains the temper. Another tremor shook the dome, this one accompanied by a shower of sparks from a nearby console. Riggs yanked his feet down just in time, cursing under his breath. Okay, Jax, Lyra said, trying to keep the rising panic from her voice. I need you to focus. We can't afford to lose any of our systems right now. No pressure, Jax replied, his sarcasm as sharp as a freshly honed blade. Just trying to prevent death by alien-induced tech failure. Riggs snorted, trying to lighten the mood. If we survive this, think they'll name a syndrome after us. Europa panic disorder or something. Only if we manage not to become a cautionary tale, Selene quipped, her fingers dancing over her tablet as she monitored the biofeedback. The lights flickered again, the dome groaning like a ship caught in a storm. Lyra could feel the tension rising, a pulse of anxiety that threatened to drown them all if they didn't find a solution soon. Jax, how are those adjustments coming? Lyra asked, her voice a mix of hope and desperation. Almost there, Jax promised, though he sounded less than convinced. Just need to before he could finish, the room plunged into darkness, the hum of machinery dying like a strangled gasp. Lyra's heart skipped a beat, the silence more terrifying than the chaos. Well, this is cozy, Riggs quipped, his voice piercing the void. Any chance we can get the lights back on before we're reduced to telling ghost stories? Already on it, Jax replied, his tone uncharacteristically tense. Backup generators should kick in any second. A few heartbeats later, dim emergency lights flickered on, casting a sickly glow over the room. The air was thick with tension, each breath a reminder of how precarious their situation had become. Okay, Lyra said, taking a deep breath. Damage report. What are we dealing with? Main systems are offline, Jax said, frustration etched into his features. Backup's holding for now, but we can't sustain it for long. Perfect, Riggs muttered. So we're on borrowed time. Selene scanned her tablet, her expression a mix of concern and fascination. The hive mind signals are still active but erratic. It's like they're struggling to keep it together. Much like us, Lyra muttered, pinching the bridge of her nose. Ideas, people. I need ideas. Maybe if we can stabilize their signals, it might give us some breathing room, Selene suggested, tapping through data like she was playing a particularly challenging game of Minesweeper. How? Riggs asked, skepticism plastered across his face. We can't even keep our own systems stable. Lyra considered the options, each more improbable than the last. If we can isolate the most stable part of their signal and sync it with our systems, it might steady the flow. Great plan, Jax said, rolling up his sleeves like a man about to wade into a swamp. Assuming we can find the needle in the cosmic haystack. Do we have any other choice? Lyra shot back, her gaze unwavering. Time to get creative, people. With a collective nod, the team dove into their tasks, each member wrestling with their own piece of the puzzle. The room buzzed with the sound of typing and rapid-fire exchanges of information that felt like lifelines in the encroaching darkness. Got it, Selene exclaimed, her voice cutting through the tension like a ray of hope. There's a consistent pattern here, buried beneath the chaos. It's faint, but it's there. Finally, some good news, Riggs said, a half-smile playing on his lips. Now we just need to work it into our systems without crashing everything. Jax cracked his knuckles, a determined glint in his eye. Leave it to me. Just keep your fingers crossed. Fingers, toes, hell, even my eyes if it helps, Riggs joked, though his tone was laced with genuine hope. As Jax set to work, Lyra watched the display anxiously, her mind a storm of calculations and what-ifs. The fate of their little corner of the universe hung in the balance, and all they could do was hope they hadn't miscalculated. Minutes stretched into eternity, each second a nerve-wracking reminder of how fragile their situation was. Finally, Jax let out a triumphant shout, his face lighting up as the systems hummed back to life. "Got it," he breathed, his relief palpable. "We're synced with their stable signal. Should buy us some time." "Nice work," Lyra said, her gratitude as warm as the recycled air would allow. "Let's keep an eye on it and pray they keep it together." The dome shuddered once more, but this time it felt less like a death rattle and more like a burp. Lyra allowed herself a small smile, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. "Well," Riggs said, leaning back with a satisfied grin, "looks like we might live to see another day after all." "Don't jinx it," Jax cautioned, though there was a hint of amusement in his voice. "We've still got a long way to go." "All the more reason to celebrate the small victories," Celine added, her fingers tapping out a rhythm on her tablet that felt almost like a heartbeat. As the team settled back into their stations, the room buzzed with a renewed sense of determination. They were far from out of the woods, but they'd managed to carve out a temporary reprieve. "Right," Lyra said, her gaze sweeping over her team with pride. "Let's keep this going. We've got a lot to figure out before the universe decides to throw another tantrum." The crew nodded, the bond between them stronger than ever. They were misfits, survivors, but most importantly, they were a team. And as long as they had each other, they might just make it through the chaos. At least until the next alien migraine decided to ruin their day. "Time for that drink yet?" Riggs asked, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Once we're sure we won't blow up," Lyra replied, laughter bubbling up despite the madness. "We'll call it survival champagne. Now that's a toast I can get behind," Jax said, his smirk infectious. With a collective chuckle, they returned to their tasks, the weight of the universe temporarily lifted. They'd survive and maybe even thrive, provided they learned to navigate the chaos, and do it with style. The lights flickered once more, but this time it felt almost like a wink from the universe, a reminder that while the cosmos was unforgiving, it could still surprise them. And with any luck, they might just surprise it back. The room was still buzzing with the low hum of machinery, a testament to Jax's engineering prowess or maybe just blind luck. Either way, the recycled air tasted a little less like desperation and more like a warm, stale embrace. But as Lyra glanced over at Celine, she noticed a frown that could rival a thunderstorm. "Trouble in paradise," Riggs quipped, leaning back in his chair. "Or did someone steal your petri dish?" Celine shook her head, eyes glued to her tablet as if it were a crystal ball. "It's the hive. The signal's there." Off how?" Lyra asked, already bracing for whatever bad news the universe had decided to throw at them next. "Off like a teenager's mood swings," Celine replied, her expression a mix of fascination and horror. "They're splitting, like, emotionally, and I'm not talking subtle shifts." "Wait," Jax interjected, looking up from his console. "You're telling me our alien friends are having a group therapy session, and we're the ones causing it?" "Pretty much," Celine said, tapping through data that looked more like a bad abstract painting than anything useful. "Seems our emotional signals are bleeding into theirs." Riggs snorted. "Well, isn't that just peachy? We've gone and given the hive a mental breakdown." "Who knew our emotional baggage had intergalactic reach?" Lyra ran a hand through her hair, searching for a thread of logic in this tangled mess. "Okay, so our emotions are screwing with them. Any idea why?" Celine shrugged. "Could be they're so interconnected that any emotional distortion hits them like a mallet to the face. Our fear, stress, whatever, it's like we're pumping it directly into their system." "Great," Jax muttered. "So we're not just babysitters, we're bad influences. Add that to our job description." "So what do we do?" Lyra asked, ignoring the gnawing anxiety creeping up her spine. "Cut the connection and hope they find a cosmic shrink." Celine sighed, her fingers still dancing over her tablet. "It's risky. Severing contact might stabilize them, but it could also push them over the edge." "Or," Riggs said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, We could play interstellar psychiatrists and try to calm them down. Maybe send them a playlist of smooth jazz. Because that's worked so well before, Jax added, a smirk tugging at his lips. Lyra considered their options, none of which promised anything but a fresh helping of chaos. We could try sending controlled emotional input, something calming, like a lullaby for aliens. Risky as hell, Celine warned. If we mess it up, it could backfire. But if we don't, Lyra countered, we might lose them and us in the fallout. Riggs chuckled darkly. So it's a choice between cosmic Kumbaya and pulling the plug. Wonderful. The dome shuddered slightly, a gentle reminder that time was running out. The tension in the room was palpable, each crew member lost in their own thoughts, weighing the potential catastrophe of either decision. All right, Lyra said, breaking the silence. Let's try and calm them. Jax, can we modulate our signals to send something soothing? Jax nodded, already pulling up the necessary systems. I'll see what I can do. Might as well try before the universe serves us another eviction notice. Celine set her tablet down, her eyes meeting Lyra's with determination. I'll help you filter the emotional data. We don't want to accidentally send them our stress. Good call, Riggs said, joining the effort by pulling up additional data. I'd hate to be responsible for the first interstellar nervous breakdown. As the team worked to cobble together a plan, the room was filled with the sound of rapid typing, each keystroke a testament to their collective desperation. It was an orchestra of tension and hope, a balancing act on the edge of oblivion. Got a signal ready, Jax said, his voice a mix of focus and resignation. It's about as calming as a digital hug gets. Let's hope it's the hug they need and not a slap in the face, Lyra said, crossing her fingers as she gave Jax the nod to proceed. With a few deft keystrokes, Jax initiated the transmission. The team watched the holographic display like it was the last lifeline in a stormy sea, tension hanging thick in the recycled air. Any change? Riggs asked, the silence stretching out as they waited. Celine's eyes flicked over the biofeedback, her brow furrowing. It's difficult to tell. There's a shift, but it's subtle. Subtle's better than nothing, Jax said, though his voice betrayed the strain. Lyra took a deep breath, willing the universe to cooperate just this once. Let's maintain it and monitor the response. If it works, we'll have bought ourselves some time. And if it doesn't, Riggs asked, though the answer was written in the set of Lyra's jaw. Then we try something else, she replied, sounding more confident than she felt. We keep trying until we run out of options or air. The room settled into a tense watchfulness, each crew member vigilant, the stakes higher than any of them cared to admit. They were riding the edge of a cosmic whirlwind, hoping to steer it without a map. Guess we're the universe's therapists now, Jax said, trying to lighten the mood but only adding to the gravity of their situation. Not exactly what I signed up for, Riggs admitted, a wry grin playing on his lips. But hey, at least it's never boring. Define never boring, Celine replied, her voice tinged with the kind of exhaustion that felt all too familiar. I'd kill for a boring Tuesday right about now. Lyra chuckled, more out of nerves than amusement. Boring's overrated. Besides, if we make it through this, we'll have one hell of a story to tell. Assuming there's anyone left to tell it to, Jax added, though there was a glimmer of hope behind his sarcasm. The minutes ticked by, each one an eternity, as they waited for some sign that their plan was working. The dome shivered occasionally, as if testing their resolve, but the catastrophic quake they feared remained at bay. How's it looking? Lyra asked eventually, her voice betraying her impatience. Celine scanned the data, her lips curving into a slow, cautious smile. I think it's stabilizing. The patterns are less erratic. Thank the stars, Riggs muttered, relief evident in his posture. Looks like we're not entirely incompetent after all. Don't get too comfortable, Jax warned, though his eyes softened. We've still got a long way to go. One crisis at a time, Lyra said, the weight of their situation momentarily lifted. For now, let's monitor and see how they respond. As the team settled back into their stations, a sense of tentative relief washed over the room. They'd managed to buy themselves a reprieve, and while their situation was far from resolved, they'd proven they could adapt and survive in the face of cosmic chaos. Who knew a little emotional resonance could save the day? Celine mused, her fingers still tapping a rhythmic pattern on her tablet. Just another day in the life of interstellar babysitters, Riggs said, his grin a beacon of irreverence. With a collective sigh, they returned to their tasks, the knowledge that they'd navigated another hurdle giving them a renewed sense of resolve. The universe might be an unforgiving place, but they'd found a way to carve out a measure of hope. "Think they'll send us a thank you note?" Jax joked, though his smile was genuine. "Only if they figure out how to write," Lyra replied, her spirits buoyed by their success. As the team worked to maintain the fragile balance they'd achieved, the room buzzed with a sense of purpose. They were still riding the edge of disaster, but with any luck they might just make it through. And maybe, just maybe, they'd come out the other side with a few more tales to tell and a little less fear of the unknown. "Survival champagne still on the table?" Riggs asked, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Let's make it through the next crisis first," Lyra replied, laughter bubbling up despite the madness. With a chuckle they returned to their tasks, the weight of the universe temporarily lifted. They'd survive and maybe even thrive, provided they learned to navigate the chaos and do it with style. The lights flickered once more, but this time it felt almost like a wink from the universe, a reminder that while the cosmos was unforgiving, it could still surprise them. And with any luck, they might just surprise it back. The dome creaked like an old ship, and Lyra couldn't help but imagine it splintering apart, letting in the icy waters of Europa to turn them all into freeze-dried science experiments. The thought made her shiver, and not just because of the sub-zero temperature outside. She brushed a hand over the holographic display, the flickering lights reflecting her unease. "Is it just me, or did it get quieter?" asked Riggs, breaking the oppressive silence. His voice held that usual cocktail of sarcasm and concern, like a bartender who just ran out of gin. "And by quieter, I mean that unsettling kind where you suspect the quiet is plotting something." Celine looked up from her tablet, her brow furrowed. "Probably just the systems failing one by one," she said, trying to sound casual but failing miserably. "You know, like dominoes, but less fun and more life-threatening." "Fantastic," Jax chimed in, never missing a beat. "Nothing like the sound of impending doom to really get the adrenaline pumping. Who needs coffee, right?" Lyra tried to focus on the task at hand, but the oppressive knowledge that communication with the surface was gone loomed over her like a bad hangover. "Any word from command yet?" Jax shook his head, his fingers dancing over a console that seemed intent on rebelling against him. "We're in the dark, and not the fun kind you get at a poorly lit bar." "So, no chance of rescue then?" Riggs asked, his voice a study in sardonic resignation. "Unless you count the possibility of alien intervention, which could go either way," Celine said with a smirk, though her fingers were still working their magic on the data. "Maybe they'll come bearing gifts. Or, just finish us off." Lyra sighed, glancing at the display that was supposed to be their lifeline. "We're isolated," she said, the word tasting as bitter as it sounded. "We need to figure out how to keep this place from turning into our personal icebox." "A cozy little death trap," Riggs said with a mock cheeriness that would have made the most jaded optimist proud. "Just what I always wanted." As the dome gave another groaning protest, Jack slammed a fist on the console. "Damn it, this thing's got more attitude than a teenager who just discovered sarcasm." "That's rich coming from you," Celine shot back, not missing a beat. "Did you try turning it off and on again?" Jax gave her a look that could curdle milk. That was going to be my next brilliant move, right after I hit it with a wrench." "Just don't break it any more than it already is," Lyra interjected, feeling her patience wear thinner than a cheap suit. "We can't afford to lose any more systems." With a sigh, Celine rubbed her temples as if trying to massage sense into the situation. "Well, if we're gonna die, might as well do it together." "Group discount at the cosmic morgue." "That's the spirit," Riggs said, laughing as though the joke was actually funny. Maybe it was, in the kind of twisted way misery finds its own brand of humor. Minutes ticked by with the grace of a drunk elephant, each one heavier than the last. The dome continued its ominous symphony of stress, every creak and groan a reminder that they were living on borrowed time. "All right," Lyra said, finally breaking the tension that hung over them like a stubborn storm cloud. "Let's see if we can stabilize what's left of our systems. Jax, you think you can coax them into cooperating?" Jax shrugged, a lopsided grin on his face. "Coax? More like threaten with extreme measures. But yeah, I'll give it a shot." While Jax worked his techno-magic, Celine was nose-deep in her tablet, trying to make sense of the alien signals. "These readings are still all over the place," she muttered, looking like she'd rather be in a room full of angry bees than dealing with their current mess. "It's like they're reacting to something, but I can't pinpoint what. Maybe it's our optimism," Riggs quipped, though his eyes stayed glued to his console. "That's enough to scare anyone off. Or our sparkling personalities," Jax added, his voice dripping with dry sarcasm as he jiggled a wire with the care of a bomb technician. "Aliens probably took one look at us and decided to call it a day," Celine snorted, unable to help herself. "If they are smart, they'll stay away." Lyra, however, wasn't laughing. Her fingers tapped a steady rhythm on the display, her mind racing through options like a gambler down to their last chip. "What else can we do? If the dome collapses, we're done." "Not much," Jax admitted, finally pulling his head out of the console like a miner surfacing after a long shift. "But if we can keep the essential systems from going completely haywire, we might stand a chance." "A slim chance," Celine corrected, though there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "But a chance nonetheless." "Great," Riggs said, turning to Lyra with a grin that was more defiant than cheerful. "So we're basically betting our lives on a maybe. Sounds about right." Lyra nodded, feeling the weight of their predicament settle even heavier on her shoulders. "Better than nothing. Let's get to work." With that, the team threw themselves into the task of keeping their little slice of hell from becoming their icy tomb. It was a frenetic dance of desperation and ingenuity, each of them pushing the limits of their endurance. They knew better than anyone that giving up simply wasn't an option. "Come on, you piece of junk," Jax muttered, coaxing and cursing his console in equal measure. "We just need a bit more time. Don't let me down now." Celine was busy cross-referencing data, her face a mask of grim determination. "If we can just keep this thing stable, maybe we can figure out what's spooking these aliens and deal with it." "Assuming they're not planning our demise," Riggs chimed in, but there was less bite to his words than usual. Lyra felt a flicker of pride as she watched her team work. They were scrappy, stubborn, and just the right amount of crazy to make this work. If anyone could pull off the impossible, it was them. The dome, as if sensing their determination, stopped its incessant groaning, settling into a tense silence that was almost worse than the noise. The air felt thicker, charged with the weight of their collective hopes and fears. "All right," Jax said finally, stepping back from the console. "I think I've got it stable for now, but we're on borrowed time if we don't fix this soon." "We will," Lyra interrupted, her voice steady. "We have to." The silence hung between them, heavy as a lead weight, each of them acutely aware of the ticking clock. They were hanging by a thread, the precipice of disaster yawning wide beneath them. But they were still here, still fighting, and that was something. As the Iors dragged on, the tension in the room became a living thing, wrapping around them like a constrictor. The darkness seemed to seep into their souls, whispering of all the ways this could end badly. "How much longer can we hold out?" Celine asked eventually, breaking the silence that had settled like a shroud. Jax ran a hand through his hair, looking as weary as the rest of them felt. "Not long enough unless we come up with a miracle." "Well, I've always been a fan of divine interventions," Riggs said, forcing a grin. "Maybe this'll be the day we get one." Lyra shook her head, though there was a hint of a smile on her lips. "If only. But for now, let's keep doing what we can." With a collective nod, the team returned to their tasks, each of them pushing past the exhaustion that clung to their bones. They'd faced worse odds before, and they weren't about to let a little thing like impending doom stop them now. The Iors stretched on, and the darkness outside seemed to press in closer, its chill seeping through the walls to wrap around them. But they kept fighting, their determination a beacon in the gloom. "Any luck with the signals?" Lyra asked eventually, glancing over at Selene. Selene shook her head, frustration etched into her features. "Not yet, but I'll keep trying. Maybe we'll hit something eventually. Odds are about as good as winning the lottery," Riggs said with a shrug. But stranger things have happened. As if on cue, the dome gave another low shudder, a reminder that their time was running out. Lyra felt her heart skip a beat, but she forced herself to focus on the task at hand. "We can do this," she said quietly, though whether she was trying to convince herself or the others, she wasn't sure. "We have to." The team continued their battle against the encroaching chaos, their efforts fueled by a mix of grit and desperation. And as the minutes ticked by, they found themselves clinging to the hope that somehow they'd find a way to survive. "Maybe we'll get lucky," Jack said eventually, his voice tinged with a cautious optimism. "At this point, I'd take a miracle wrapped in a lottery ticket." "Wouldn't we all?" Lyra replied, her smile a little less forced than before. "Let's just hope the universe is feeling generous." And so they fought on, the darkness pressing in around them like a silent witness. But despite the odds, they remained defiant, their determination refusing to be snuffed out. The dome creaked again, a reminder of the danger that loomed over them. But as long as they were still standing, they had a chance. And in the vast, uncaring expanse of the universe, sometimes a chance was all it took. The dome was holding steady, for now. But that didn't mean the atmosphere inside was any less tense than a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. Lyra could practically taste the anxiety in the recycled air, like a mouthful of old pennies, and it wasn't doing her any favors. "So, what's next on our to-do list for averting doom?" Riggs asked, leaning back in his chair as if he were lounging at a beach instead of staring at a console that could spell their icy demise. Lyra arched an eyebrow, glancing at Jax, the resident miracle worker and chief engineer who seemed to thrive under pressure. Or at least, he hadn't snapped like a dry twig yet. "Got any brilliant ideas, Jax? Or should we just hold hands and sing Kumbaya until the walls cave in?" Jax chuckled, a sound more sardonic than amused. "I was thinking a bit more high-tech than that, although your singing might actually scare the aliens into submission." "Thanks for the vote of confidence," Lyra shot back. "Now spill." Jax leaned over his console, tapping a series of commands with the finesse of a pianist at a broken piano recital. "So here's the plan. We send a harmonized emotional signal to the hive. If we can match their frequency, we might be able to stabilize whatever's got them all riled up." Riggs snorted. "Great. First contact, and we're sending a goddamn love letter." "Think of it more as a musical therapy session," Jax said, deadpan as ever. "Except the instruments are our emotions, and the audience might decide we're the main course." Selene, who had been silently contemplating her tablet like a fortune teller with an extra bad omen, finally looked up. "How do we even start crafting a signal like that?" "With a whole lot of improvisation," Jax replied, as if that was the most obvious thing in the world. "We share memories, emotions, whatever we've got. Mix it into a digital cocktail and hope the hive gets drunk on it instead of angry." "Emotional cocktail. Sounds like a recipe for disaster or a bad hangover," Lyra commented, her skepticism doing a little tap dance across her face. "We're already living the disaster," Selene pointed out, her voice tinged with a resigned frustration. "Might as well try something different." Lyra nodded, the logic as comforting as a porcupine hug. "All right, team, time to get personal. Anyone got a memory worth sharing that screams we're not a threat?" Riggs leaned forward, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "Back home, I used to take my little sister stargazing, show her the constellations, tell her stories about space pirates and rogue planets. It was nice. I guess that's as good a start as any." "Touching," Jax said, not unkindly. "And you, Selene, Got anything that won't make the aliens declare war on us? Celine hesitated, a shadow flitting across her features. I used to have a garden before all this. I'd spend hours tending to it, watching things grow against all odds. Lyra offered a smile, one that felt genuine despite the storm clouds brewing around them. Growth, survival, not bad. And you, Jax? Riggs asked, his sarcasm dialed down to a more human level. Jax paused, his usual bravado absent for a rare moment of introspection. I remember fixing my dad's old hovercraft. Took me the better part of a summer, but when it finally roared to life, the look on his face, yeah, that was something. Sounds like we've got the makings of a decent lullaby, Riggs said, his tone bittersweet. Lyra took a deep breath, her hands steady as they hovered over the holographic display. Let's do this. If we're going to play Cosmic DJ, we better hope the Hive likes our mixtape. They set to work, each of them contributing memories and emotions like ingredients in a stew. Jax's fingers danced over the console, weaving a digital tapestry from the threads of their shared pasts. The air buzzed with an energy that was at once terrifying and exhilarating. So what's the verdict? Celine asked, her eyes glued to the tablet. Jax shrugged, his expression unreadable. We'll know soon enough. Either the Hive chills out or we get the alien equivalent of a restraining order. Optimistic as ever, Riggs said, offering a wry grin. Lyra looked around at her team, the faces that had become as familiar as her own reflection. They were tired, battered by the emotional roller coaster that was their existence, but they were still here, still fighting. All right, let's send this little love letter and see if it gets us a second date, Lyra said, her voice a mix of determination and gallows humor. With a final series of keystrokes, Jax executed the command, and their homemade signal soared into the electromagnetic abyss, a digital plea for peace wrapped in human experience. For a moment, the dome was silent, the kind of silence that wraps around you like a shroud, waiting to see if you'll breathe, scream, or just collapse under its weight. Then, a subtle change. The machinery around them hummed with a new energy, an almost harmonious vibration that set the hairs on Lyra's arms standing on end. The oppressive weight of the air seemed to lighten, if only for a moment. Did it work? Celine asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid to break the fragile spell. Jax tilted his head, listening to the soft, steady hum of the systems. I think so. The signals are stabilizing, at least for now. Guess the Hive liked our mixtape, Riggs said, his relief palpable. Lyra allowed herself a small smile, though she knew better than to declare victory just yet. We've bought ourselves some time. Let's not waste it. As they returned to their stations, the sense of camaraderie was stronger, fortified by the shared vulnerability and the tenuous hope that they might just pull through. Keep monitoring those signals, Lyra instructed, her tone all business again. We're not out of the woods yet. Celine nodded, already engrossed in her tablet, her fingers flying over the screen with renewed vigor. I'll keep an eye on the Hive's response. We might be able to gauge their mood shifts. Great, Riggs said with a mock salute. Let's hope we don't accidentally send them a breakup song next time. Jax chuckled, the tension in his shoulders easing just a fraction. Yeah, I'd rather not be known as the guy who pissed off an alien hive with a bad playlist. Lyra settled back into her seat, the weight of leadership heavy but bearable. They still had a long way to go, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she believed they might just make it. Let's keep our fingers crossed and our ears open, she said, her voice a steady anchor in the sea of uncertainty. As the minutes ticked by, the team continued their watch, united by the fragile thread of hope they'd woven together. The specter of failure loomed ever-present, but for now, it was held at bay by sheer force of will and human ingenuity. In the vast, uncaring cosmos, they were a small but stubborn flicker of life, refusing to be extinguished. And sometimes, in the face of overwhelming odds, that was all you needed. Here's to hoping the universe is in the mood for a happy ending, Riggs mused, his voice contemplative. Or at least not a tragic one, Celine added, her smile a little more relaxed. Lyra nodded, the corners of her mouth lifting in a semblance of a grin. We'll take what we can get. The dome, their fragile sanctuary against the unforgiving, icy world outside, remained a tenuous refuge. But as long as they held their ground, it would be enough. For now. Keep talking, keep working, Jack said, his eyes fixed on the console as if sheer concentration could will it to remain operational. We're in this together. Always were, Lyra replied softly, feeling the truth of it settle deep within her. The air felt a little less oppressive as they continued their vigil, the specter of disaster still hovering but no longer suffocating. They had a chance, slim as it might be, and that was more than they'd had before. Each of them settled back into their tasks, the rhythm of their work a steady heartbeat against the uncertainty. They'd faced the void and had managed not to get swallowed whole. For now, that was enough. And in the grand scheme of things, sometimes enough was all you needed to keep going. The dome shuddered like an old dog trying to shake off a flea, but the vibration smoothed out, turning into a gentle purr. Lyra glanced at the console, half expecting it to explode in a blaze of dysfunctional glory. But nope, it just sat there, humming along as if it hadn't been on the verge of having a nervous breakdown. Well, look at that, Riggs said, voice dripping with sarcasm. Our love letter didn't crash and burn. I guess even alien hives have a soft spot for Disney-style happy endings. Jax leaned back in his chair, cracking a knuckle. Maybe they're just suckers for a good redemption arc. Or they took pity on the poor earthlings trying to save their own asses. Or maybe they're planning to invite us for dinner, Celine added, her eyes not leaving her tablet though the corners of her mouth twitched upward. And by dinner, I mean serving us as the main course. Lyra snorted though the tension in her shoulders eased a bit. Ah, yes. The classic we come in peace, eat in pieces approach. A real crowd pleaser. Riggs chuckled, though it sounded more like a cough. If they are planning to eat us, let's at least hope they are gourmet. I'd hate to be seasoned with low-quality spices. Better hope they are into organic, Jax quipped. We've been living on recycled air and irradiated rations. Not exactly farm-to-table. Celine finally looked up from her tablet, her expression contemplative. Incorporating emotions into a hive mind. It's kind of beautiful, in a terrifying way. Like an alien group therapy session. Yeah, I'm sure their alien therapist is telling them to breathe deeply and chant Om while planning our inevitable doom, Lyra replied, though her sarcasm held a kernel of admiration. Seriously though, what's the hive doing with our signal? Jax tapped a few keys, bringing up a visual of the signal patterns, now forming a complex interwoven lattice. Looks like they are integrating it. Reassembling, incorporating our emotions into whatever the hell their consciousness is. So we've become part of their alien self-help book. Riggs asked, scratching his chin. Chapter 1. How to Not Destroy Humankind, or maybe Chapter 2. Understanding the Bipolar Earthling, Celine added, her tone just shy of wistful. It's fascinating, really. Sharing memories, emotions, bridging that gap. Fascinating, Lyra repeated, though she couldn't quite keep the edge out of her voice. But it doesn't mean we're safe. Not yet. Cautious optimism is the best kind of optimism, Jax said, though his fingers never stopped moving over the console, making adjustments, monitoring the ever-shifting data. Like betting on a three-legged horse in a race, Riggs chimed in. Sure, it's optimistic, but also kind of dumb. Celine chuckled softly. At least we're not betting the farm. Just our lives. Small stakes, really, Lyra said, settling back in her chair. Still, let's keep an eye out. Until we know for sure they're not planning to turn us into alien popsicles, it's business as usual. The dome settled into a familiar rhythm, the machinery no longer whining like a toddler denied candy. For now, they had a ceasefire. Maybe even a chance to coexist if they played their cards right. So how's the hive responding? Lyra asked, turning to Celine. Celine's fingers danced over the tablet, eyes flicking back and forth, calm, like a pond before a storm. Whatever we did, it's working. They're not agitated. The signals are holding steady, steady as a drunk on a tightrope, Riggs muttered, though there was a spark of humor in his eyes. Jax nodded, though his expression remained focused. It's a start. We've given them something to chew on, figuratively speaking. Now we just need to keep them interested. Like an intergalactic soap opera, Lyra said. Keep the drama flowing, but don't let anyone get bored or pissed off, Jax added. That'd be bad. Riggs leaned back, stretching his arms overhead. We've managed to not screw up so far. Let's try and keep it that way. Agreed, Lyra said, though a small part of her couldn't help but wonder when the other shoe would drop. Keep monitoring the signals and let me know if anything changes. Anything. Celine nodded, her gaze returning to her tablet. I'll keep tracking the emotional fluctuations. They seem receptive, but that could change. Like that time you tried to teach Jax to dance, Riggs teased, earning a glare from the engineer. That was a low blow, Jax said, though his lips curved into a reluctant smile. And for the record, I was a fantastic dancer, right? Lyra said, her tone amused. About as graceful as a cat on roller skates. Jax shrugged, unbothered. Hey, at least I didn't fall on my face. Just someone else's, Celine quipped, her smile returning. Lyra shook her head, the banter a welcome distraction from the looming uncertainty. All right, children, back to work. We've got an alien hive to entertain. The dome settled into a companionable silence, punctuated by the occasional beep and whir of the machinery. They were still in danger, still teetering on the edge of a very large, very deep cliff. But at least they weren't dangling by their fingertips anymore. Crazy, isn't it? Riggs said suddenly, his voice softer. How close we came to screwing it all up. Lyra didn't look up from her console. Yeah, but what's life without a little chaos, more predictable? For one, Jax said, though there was a hint of a challenge in his eyes. But where's the fun in that? Celine glanced at the display, her expression uncharacteristically serene. It's amazing, really. How resilience, human or otherwise, means adapting to survive, or just being too damn stubborn to give up, Lyra said, though the words held more admiration than scorn. Riggs chuckled. We're definitely good at that. Too stubborn to know when to quit. Good thing, too, Jax said, eyes still on the console. Because if we were the quitting type, we'd have been toast a long time ago. To survival, then, Celine said, her voice thoughtful. And whatever comes next. Let's just hope whatever comes next isn't worse than what we've already faced, Lyra said, her tone dry. Here's hoping, Riggs agreed, lifting an imaginary glass in a toast to the uncertain future. The minutes ticked by, the dome settling into a new rhythm, one that felt almost hopeful. They weren't out of the woods yet, but the path forward looked a little less daunting. Riggs glanced over at Lyra, his expression unreadable. Think we'll ever get off this ice ball? Lyra shrugged, though a small smile played at her lips. Maybe. If we do, I'm going to find the nearest beach and lie there until I'm a human raisin. Count me in, Jax said. I could use some sun, and a stiff drink, Riggs added. Or several, Celine chuckled softly. We'll make it. One way or another. The dome shuddered slightly, but it wasn't the ominous tremble of impending doom. Instead, it felt almost alive. As if the hive's presence now thrummed through the walls, a new kind of symbiosis. Feels different, doesn't it? Jax said, breaking the silence. Yeah, Lyra replied, the word a whisper. It does. Maybe we can make this work, Riggs said, his tone thoughtful. Find a way to coexist. Maybe, Lyra agreed, though she couldn't quite shake the nagging sense that something could still go horribly wrong. But for now, they'd accomplished the impossible. They'd reached out across the void, and the void had answered back. It was a start, a chance, and sometimes that was all you needed. Here's to hoping the hive doesn't decide they prefer us as fertilizer, Riggs said, breaking the tension with a smile. Hey, with our luck, they might just turn us into compost, Jax replied, but his grin was genuine. Lyra let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Let's make sure it doesn't come to that. The dome hummed contentedly around them, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Lyra allowed herself to hope. Maybe they'd get off this rock. Maybe they'd find a way to coexist with whatever the hell the hive was becoming. But whatever happened next, she knew they'd face it together. A motley crew of misfits, scraping by on stubbornness, sarcasm, and the age-old human trait of refusing to quit, even when the odds were stacked against them. "We've got this," she said, more to herself than anyone else. "Damn right we do," Riggs replied, his voice steady and sure. And as they continued their vigil, the alien signals a steady background hum. Lyra knew that whatever the universe threw at them next, they'd stand their ground. Because at the end of the day, that's what humans did. They fought, they adapted, and they survived, even when the stars seemed determined to snuff them out. "Well, look at that," Riggs said, tapping the console with a finger that seemed perpetually stained with oil. "The dome systems are back online. It's like watching a miracle in a cheap suit." Lyra hovered over her own console, eyes scanning the flickering data with the intensity of a gambler at a slot machine. "And here I thought miracles were reserved for saints, not for misfit scientists stuck on a frozen rock. Guess we're wholly in our own unique, underachieving way," Jax chimed in, his lips curling into that signature smirk that always promised trouble or genius. "Usually both." "Underachieving. Speak for yourself," Celine said, though her eyes never left her tablet. "I, for one, plan to achieve great things, like not dying today." "Hey, baby steps," Riggs replied, his grin wide enough to swallow half his face. The dome hummed around them, a gentle purr that spoke of systems humming back to life rather than the ominous groan of impending doom they'd grown too familiar with. It was like having your favorite rusty car finally starting after the 50th kick to the engine. "All we need now is a choir of angels singing and we can call it a day," Lyra said, glancing at the others. "More like a chorus of broken synths," Jax replied, his fingers dancing across the keys with a dexterity that suggested he moonlighted as a pianist. "But hey, whatever gets us through the night. The signals are holding stable," Celine reported, her tone just this side of clinical, but there was a warmth there, a spark of hope. "Emotional fluctuations are minimal. Our interstellar group therapy seems to be working." "Fantastic," Riggs said. "We've got a bunch of aliens sharing their feelings instead of sharing our bones." "Progress. Let's not get too cozy," Lyra warned, though the tension in her shoulders had eased ever so slightly. "Just because they're not gnawing on our metaphorical bones now doesn't mean they won't get peckish later." "Way to kill the vibe," Jax muttered. "Comes with the job," Lyra shot back, though she couldn't help the smile that tugged at her lips. "But if this keeps up, we might actually make it out of this alive." "Wouldn't that be a twist?" Riggs said, leaning back in his chair with the kind of ease only found in someone who's just been pardoned from the gallows. "So, what now?" Celine asked, her gaze shifting from her tablet to the rest of the team. "Now we keep the show going," Lyra said. "We keep monitoring, keep adjusting. If the hive's going to play nice, we need to show them that we're willing to do the same." "It's like teaching a tiger cub to purr instead of bite," Jax said. "Let's just hope they don't decide to revert to old instincts," Riggs added, his voice light but his eyes serious. "Well, if they do," Lyra replied, "at least we can say we gave it our best shot before becoming alien catnip." "Always a silver lining," Jax said, the sarcasm only thinly veiled. As the minutes ticked by, each one felt less like a countdown to disaster and more like, well, just time passing. The dome was quieter, the air seeming a little less stale, though that could have been just the weight of imminent doom lifting ever so slightly. "Think this'll work long term?" Riggs asked, his tone almost lazy. "Who knows?" Lyra replied. "We're treading uncharted territory here. It's like trying to read a map written in some cosmic hieroglyphics." Jax chuckled. "With our luck, it's probably upside down. At least we won't be bored," Celine said, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Boredom's overrated anyway," Lyra said. "Give me a good crisis over monotony any day." "Spoken like a true adrenaline junkie," Jax replied, though his voice held no judgment. "I'm just saying, life's more interesting when you don't know if you'll wake up tomorrow or wake up inside an alien digestive tract." "Charming," Riggs grinned. "But you know there's a certain appeal to the idea of just surviving, not having every day be a question mark. Yeah, well, let's aim for that, shall we? Lyra said. One stable day at a time. The consoles continued their low hum, screens flickering with data that was beginning to seem almost mundane. The alien signals, once a chaotic symphony of potential destruction, now felt like a strange sort of rhythm, like the world's weirdest lullaby. Funny how you get used to things, Celine mused, looking up from her tablet. What was terrifying yesterday is just another Tuesday today. That's the human way, Riggs said, nodding sagely. Adapt, survive, occasionally file paperwork. Not sure if the paperwork's gonna help us here, Jack said, unless it's in triplicate. Maybe we'll have to invent alien bureaucracy, Lyra suggested. Start the paperwork trend. Might be our lasting contribution to interstellar civilization. Spoken like someone who's never fought with a malfunctioning printer, Jax replied. Don't remind me, Riggs groaned. I'd rather face the hive alone than deal with one of those things. The mood was lighter, a hesitant optimism creeping in like sunshine through Europa's eternal ice. They weren't out of danger yet, but they had something they hadn't had in a long time. A plan, a semblance of control, and maybe even a shot at making a difference. Feels like we're building something here, Celine said quietly. Yeah, Lyra agreed, her voice softer. Feels like. Hope. Hope's a dangerous thing, Riggs said, though his smile betrayed him. But maybe it's worth the risk. We've risked worse, Jax pointed out. And here we are. Still breathing, Lyra said, letting out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Still fighting. Still sarcastic, Riggs added, grinning. And damn proud of it, Lyra shot back, her grin matching his. Europa loomed beyond the dome, a stark reminder of the hostile world outside their fragile bubble. But within, they'd carved out a piece of progress, a chance at something more than survival, a shot at symbiosis as strange and improbable as it seemed. Think they'll let us off this ice cube soon? Jax asked, a hint of longing in his voice. Depends, Lyra replied. If we can prove it's safe and we've managed to make friends and not just frenemies. Wouldn't want to introduce a bunch of emotional aliens to the rest of the galaxy unescorted, Riggs said. Imagine the intergalactic incident, Celine added, her smile rueful. Diplomatic relations tanked over alien group hugs gone wrong. Jax chuckled. Hey, at least we wouldn't be dull anymore. No risk of that, Lyra said. Not with us at the helm. The dome shuddered slightly, not the violent kind that threatened to turn them inside out, but the kind that felt more like an afterthought. A closing note on a symphony that had started with screams and ended with. Not silence, but something close enough. Guess we'll have to see what the hive wants next, Riggs said, his tone almost philosophical. Whatever it is, Lyra replied, we'll handle it together. And there it was, the unspoken truth that had carried them through thick and thin and alien-induced near-death experiences. They'd been thrust together by fate or luck or some cosmic joke, but they'd endured. As the dome settled back into a familiar rhythm, the machinery a gentle background hum, Lyra allowed herself to relax. Riggs, Celine said, breaking the companionable silence. Yeah, if we ever get to that beach, I suppose you'll be the one mixing the drinks. Damn right, Riggs replied. And they'll be the best you've ever had, Jax grinned. I'll hold you to that. Consider it a promise, Riggs said, his voice steady. We'll get off this rock, one way or another. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Lyra believed him. Maybe their luck would hold, maybe they'd find a way to coexist with the hive, and maybe, just maybe, they'd find their way back to the stars. But whatever the future held, they'd face it like they always had, with a little bit of sarcasm, a lot of stubbornness, and an unwavering belief in the power of human tenacity. Because at the end of the day, that was what they did best. They survived, they adapted, and against all odds they thrived, even in the darkest corners of the universe. All right, Lyra said, straightening in her chair. Let's keep this show on the road. To new beginnings, Celine said, smiling. And to not becoming alien compost, Jax added. Hear, hear, Riggs said, raising an imaginary glass, his eyes twinkling with mischief. And with that, they turned back to their consoles, the dome buzzing with the energy of a new tomorrow.